I went to a Catholic school from preschool to 8th grade, and every week the priests would come and visit the classrooms. But I noticed that, priests get moved around, the associates were getting changed. Usually were younger priests, but even though it was a different man, it was the same joy, it was the same passion, it was the same energy. And so I thought, okay, well, what do all these guys have in common? And I realized that they all wore the same thing. They had the same uniform. So I looked at that and I thought, well, that's something to think about.
Growing up, I wasn't super into my faith. I struggled a lot with doubts about whether this is true, my Catholic faith was true, whether God existed. And I think that really prevented me from getting deeper into my faith. But eventually, I started learning more, reading more about the Catholic faith, and saw how much sense it made and how intelligent it is. And after that point, I was more willing to invest myself in it. I didn't think immediately about the priesthood, even when I started learning about the Catholic faith, because I was going to school for what I wanted to do, and I wanted to get married, and that's just the default of what you do. Eventually, though, I started listening to more priest homilies, listening to inspiring priests, and I started considering it. And I went to a priest at my Newman Center, and I said, Father John, I'm thinking about this whole seminary thing. And he seemed kind of, had an intrigued look on his face. And I said, what? He said, your brother just came in here last week. And I was totally thrown off guard because I had no idea he was even remotely thinking about the priesthood.
Once I got to high school, I became very rebellious. I was a terrible student. I got involved with a circle of friends who just perpetuated that problem. And when I was 16 years old, I started drinking pretty regularly. Got involved in the party scene a lot. And that would continue for the next 5 or 6 years of my life.
When I was about 14 years old, I had a powerful encounter with the Lord in Eucharistic adoration when I was at a youth conference at a Catholic college. And that really changed my life. And I really, from that point on, I realized that I would never be fulfilled unless I lived my life totally for God.
I became very empty and depressed feeling, and I regretted a lot of the time that I wasted on shallow relationships, impure relationships, and just living for myself and my own pleasure all that time. I was very burnt out on it, and that state, while it was really horrible, had really opened me up to being willing to hear the heart of the gospel message anew.
I went on a retreat at Notre Dame, and I met a seminarian who gave me a piece of advice, and he just said, everybody has a responsibility to discern their vocation. In my senior year in high school, I pretty much took that piece of advice to heart and said, okay, I'll be open to whatever God's calling me to. I won't assume that marriage is my vocation. And once I opened myself up to that possibility, God just started flooding into my heart and really just pointed me in a new direction.
I had a great group of friends in high school. Loved going to the football games, basketball games, student section. Very ordinary, very regular. Dated in high school, went to the dances. It was a lot of fun. And but at the end of the time in high school, my vocation director at the time knew that I had been thinking about the possibility of seminary. So he called me in my senior year and he said, are you still interested? And I said yes.
Once I opened myself up to the priesthood, I met a girl and basically was put into a situation where I had to make a decision. I had to say either I'm going to pursue this relationship with this girl or I'm going to enter into the seminary. And that was a hard decision for me, and I wrestled with it for about 6 months, 7 months, until I really finally admitted to myself, God is calling me to enter the seminary right now.
I very quickly disqualified myself. I thought, I'm not worthy to be a priest. I've done so many horrible things in my life. I'm not that good of a person, and I'm doubting, I'm skeptical, I'm prideful, I'm selfish, and I just don't see how God can be calling me.
a man might be considering seminary, but then he's seized by fear that says, well, no, all you are is your bad language. All you are is your unchaste thoughts. All you are is this failed relationship, and then they begin to define themselves by that, and that fear holds them in that place. I think what faith does against fear is faith moves us to trust God.
Oftentimes, young men who are thinking about coming to the seminary, particularly if they're coming right out of high school, have some reservations about entering into a seminary. They think that, by going to the seminary, they're signing on the dotted line that they're committing to be a priest. And what I always tell them is you don't go to the seminary to become a priest. You go to the seminary to figure out if I'm supposed to become a priest.
I realized that being a priest meant doing some things that I didn't want to do. It meant I couldn't, date. I couldn't have my own wife and family. I couldn't follow a career path that I really wanted to do.
Definitely one of my biggest fears was going to seminary for 2 years and then not being ordained, because now I'm behind in whatever school I was going to do. I have more student loans, and I'm just behind on life.
If a young man is discerning a vocation and he comes to seminary and then discerns he's not called to the priesthood, human formation is never lost. He'll be a better man, he'll be a better husband for the time he has spent in discerning God's call in seminary.
We had an extended big Italian family, so Sunday afternoons we'd go to my grandparents every Sunday and have lunch. And so I thought, that element of my life on Sundays, what's that going to be like at the seminary? It's going to be an open afternoon. And so I was nervous about that element of being out of my normal.
I think it's been pretty common throughout my life. I've been known to have many acquaintances, but few real friends. And so I was really worried that was going to carry over into seminary. But I was very, very surprised to find that I made some of the best friends I've ever had.
In a short amount of time here, this place has really felt like home. And I think, discerning your vocation and just going through life, it's important to have other places we can call home.
Seminary has a very structured life, but it really allows us to meet new people and really get to know the people we live with. We call the people at seminary our brother seminarians, because we go through so much with them, and good times and in bad.
You can go and ask with the intention of asking to borrow a pen from a guy's room, and then you end up sitting in there for 45 minutes, just telling stories about the day, laughing about different experiences.
I found that I've become very close friends with men who, unfortunately, I don't think I ever would have really talked too much or had the opportunity to get to know outside of the seminary. I think that's really because we share this common ground in our vocation and in Jesus Christ. And when we find relationships where they're based on something far deeper and far more meaningful than any worldly aspirations or worldly hobbies or interests could ever foster, we find this deep mutual love for each other and for God in our vocation.
Having lived here for a year, I don't understand how anyone could picture seminary without it. A lot of humor and so much joy and so much laughter. There's a few practical jokers that are always keeping things interesting, and just always so many people who are able to make you laugh.
Can you have fun at seminary? Most definitely.
Still looking for the reason why. Still looking for the sun to shine.
I can get in the way of receiving God's love. And by being in community, I receive love from other people and I'm brought outside of myself.
The tension or the stretch sometimes of living in community is really a way that the Lord opens your heart to love more.
I think one fear that a lot of young men have about entering seminary is losing who they are. You enter this place and you become a seminarian and, you're changing yourself to fit this mold.
I came to seminary when I was 18, straight from high school. At that point, I was really unsure about my vocation and about who I was just in general, really insecure about myself.
I realized that a lot of human formation is discovering who I am, the positives, the negative qualities that I have, the strengths and the weaknesses, all make me who I am.
It's really about becoming Christ-like. It's about becoming more like Christ by becoming the fullness of the man that God has created us to be. In the college seminary, human formation is the most important thing that we focus on.
One of the main tasks of human formation is the individual being able to come to perceive himself as others perceive him.
There was a time when I had a summer assignment at a parish, and I had an internal crisis during that time. I was kind of like, am I really able to continue on this path? I met with the formation staff, and I just told them everything that I was struggling with. Essentially what everyone told me on the formation staff was that they could see where God had been working in my life up to that point, and they could see that God was working now even though I couldn't. Sometimes we cannot see what's going on with us. We can't see the good things. Sometimes we can't see the bad things either. But they're there to kind of help us to stay grounded in reality.
To me, spiritual direction is the meat and potatoes of discernment. I mean, that's the place where you sit down with another person, a guide, to look at how the Lord is active in your life. It's helped me to really look at the question, am I in the right place? Am I moving in the right direction? Is the Lord inviting me to continue on?
The goal of all formation is to be transparent before God and not to be afraid.
Something that I've learned, especially through formation here at seminary, is that our prayer life in the liturgy, in the Mass, and all of our devotional practices, they're not separate from the rest of our life. They're really a culmination or a summation and a bringing together of the rest of our life, in which we bring our whole selves before God. It's not a compartment or a subject, some book that we can pull off the shelf when we want to, and to pray and to think about God and then put Him back on the shelf. It's that whole culmination, everything coming together.
Oftentimes as a child, we're taught rote prayers. Those are important, those have value. But I think in seminary, we try to cultivate more the contemplative of listening to God, and particularly with spiritual direction, to realize, what is God calling me to do?
When we look at the life of Jesus, we see He actually had 30 years of preparation in His home at Nazareth. A hidden time in prayer and in work in preparation for His ministry in the presence of the Blessed Mother. And that's kind of what seminary is.
Anytime I need someone to intercede for me, the Blessed Mother is one of the first people I go to. And it's so beautiful to see that I'm not alone in that. I think the Blessed Mother is definitely the strongest confidant of almost all of the seminarians here.
The Eucharist is really at the heart of seminary life. As seminarians, we're so blessed to live in the same building and under the same roof with Jesus in the Eucharist.
Being in a place of formation where I have prayer daily as a part of my schedule, where I have the sacraments, where I get to go to confession, I get to eat and drink the body and blood of Christ, I'm just flooded by Christ's love. It's difficult sometimes, and it's hard. Seminary is a difficult place, but it pushes you to become a better man, and it pushes you to do that really quick.
A lot of people have sort of a distorted understanding of freedom in our world. You see, freedom, true freedom, is freedom from sin. It's the freedom to live as God has called you to live. As a priest, you're called to live in obedience to the church.
I found that I trust in obedience because each time that I've lived out obedience when I haven't felt like it, I've experienced freedom and grace.
Living a celibate life, a lot of people would say, oh, that's impossible. No one can do that in our culture.
I didn't know if I was going to be fully happy if I made that sacrifice. And I was thinking about this earlier on when I was discerning. I was like, if I'm saying I can't be happy unless I have this job or if I'm married, I'm basically saying with the way I act in my heart that God isn't enough. If God really is our source of joy, our source of happiness, that's not consistent. God is enough.
When I was considering seminary, a big struggle for me was not having a family in the future as a priest, not getting married, not having kids. Through seminary, I've realized that when I'm a father, a spiritual father to others as a priest, that love is just as real as a physical fatherhood, but it's a different type of love.
Celibacy frees us to love in a particular way after the heart of Jesus Christ.
Just as that child, when it grows, it'll fall and stumble sometimes, and the father can be there to pick them up. The priest is able to do that very powerfully in the sacrament of confession. In the same way that a father works hard to put food on the table for his family, to nourish them, provide them for them, the priest is able to bring the bread of life and the cup of salvation to his children.
To celebrate the sacraments and to be in that place to make Christ present, to listen with compassion in the confessional, those are things that give me great joy. Why? Well, because they nourish the community of faith.
Being able to minister the sacraments to people, being able to commit myself to something outside myself, something greater than myself, that's attractive to me.
I love being a priest. Every single day, I thank God for calling me to be a priest.
We live in a broken world. A lot of people don't have a sense of meaning, purpose. And I think when priests, follow their vocation to the fullest, they point to Christ, and they point others to Christ. And there we find the fullness of truth. We find our joy, we find meaning in life, we find purpose.
By his life, the priest serves as a window to the mercy of Jesus Christ.
The world needs more men to respond to the call of priesthood because the world needs the Eucharist.